Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The crumbling workshop at the far end of our yard had been nagging at me for what felt like forever. More than just an ugly structure leaning against the rear boundary like a weary old gentleman, it symbolized something deeper, a task David, my spouse, had promised he'd tackle someday. Well, someday had expanded into several years, marked by half-hearted starts, abandoned equipment, and the steady advance of vines that seemed determined to consume it entirely. David had good intentions. He always did, but his career, his weekend tennis matches, life itself always managed to interfere. I understood completely. I really did. But watching that workshop tilting increasingly dangerously just eroded my tranquility. It seemed like a physical representation of incomplete tasks, commitments collecting dust. This particular spring, however, I decided I'd had enough. I wanted that area restored. I imagined a small greenhouse, perhaps a peaceful spot to read, surrounded by the fragrance of soil and flowers instead of deterioration. David, sweet as he is, just exhaled when I mentioned it again, muttered something about construction expenses, and immediately forgot. That's when the notion hit me, tentative initially but becoming stronger the more I pondered it. Uncle Harold. Harold was David's uncle, his father's elder brother, a retired builder, widower, and generally reserved gentleman. He resided roughly half an hour away in the home he'd shared with his departed wife Eleanor. He was consistently gentle, with compassionate eyes and hands that still possessed the calm strength and skill of his profession. We rarely visited him. Holidays, the occasional family gathering, but there was a warmth about him, a stability that I always found reassuring. David respected him tremendously, but like many men, their discussions seldom ventured beyond sports or superficial news. Requesting Harold's assistance felt complex. It wasn't simply asking a favor. It seemed like emphasizing David's inaction, potentially stepping on feelings. Would Harold think I was criticizing his nephew? Would David feel undermined? I pondered the idea for several days, weighing the potential discomfort against my increasing determination to reclaim that section of the garden. Eventually, I decided to contact Harold directly. I figured a straightforward, honest approach was optimal. Maybe I'd present it as wanting to learn, wanting to handle it myself but needing guidance. I rehearsed the discussion in my mind, dialing his number one Tuesday morning with nervous butterflies. He answered after a few rings, his voice steady and recognizable. Harold? Hi, it's Emma. There was a brief pause, perhaps surprise. Emma, how delightful to hear from you. Is everything okay? Oh yes, everything's fine, Harold. Really? I hurried to reassure him. I was actually calling to ask. Well, it might be a bit forward, but I wanted to ask for your advice, or maybe even some assistance if you ever have the time. I explained about the workshop, my desire to renovate it, my vision for a small sanctuary. I carefully avoided mentioning David's extended delay, focusing instead on my own desire to complete the project, maybe even learn something myself. I emphasized that I didn't want to impose, that even just pointing me in the right direction would be wonderful. Harold listened patiently, the silence on his end broken only by his gentle breathing. When I finished, my words spilling out somewhat faster than intended, he didn't respond immediately. I held my breath, suddenly convinced I'd made an error. Had I offended him? Put him in an uncomfortable position? A greenhouse, you say? He finally pondered, his voice contemplative. Eleanor always wanted one of those. Never quite managed to build it for her. There was a touch of sadness in his tone that pulled at my heart. It sounds like a fine project, Emma. A worthwhile one. He paused again. Tell you what, I've got some free time this week. How about I come over Thursday morning, take a look, and we can figure out a plan? No promises I can do the whole thing, mind you, but I can certainly assess the damage and maybe show you how to tackle the worst of it. Relief flooded through me, so powerful it almost made me lightheaded. Oh, Harold, that would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Are you sure it's not too much trouble? Nonsense, he replied, a hint of warmth returning to his voice. Keeps me busy. See you Thursday. Say, mid-morning? We said our farewells, and I hung up the phone with a sense of achievement mixed with lingering apprehension. I told David that evening, framing it carefully. I called Harold today, asked his advice about the workshop. He offered to come take a look on Thursday. David glanced up from his device, surprised. Uncle Harold? Really? Huh. Okay, just don't let him overexert himself, Emma. He's not as young as he used to be. There wasn't any irritation, just mild surprise and perhaps a flicker of relief that the workshop problem might be resolved without his direct involvement. The first obstacle was cleared. Now I just had to wait for Thursday. Thursday morning arrived, bright and clear, one of those perfect late spring days where the air feels fresh and full of possibility. I was up early, tidying the garden path, making sure the access to the workshop was clear. I even baked a batch of muffins. Harold had always complimented my baking at family gatherings. It felt important to make him feel welcome, appreciated. At precisely mid-morning, his sturdy, slightly old-fashioned pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Harold climbed out, dressed in practical work pants and a plaid shirt, carrying a small worn leather toolbox. He moved with deliberate slowness that wasn't frail, just measured. His silver hair was neatly combed, and those kind eyes surveyed the house, the garden, and finally me waiting by the back door. Morning, Emma. He greeted me with a gentle smile. Lovely day for it. It is, isn't it? Thanks so much again for coming, Harold. Coffee? I've just made a fresh pot, and there are muffins. Don't mind if I do, he said, following me inside. We sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the window, illuminating the steam rising from our mugs. We talked easily, more easily than I had anticipated. He asked about the children, though they were long grown and out of the house. I asked about his garden, knowing it was his pride and joy since Eleanor passed. There was no awkwardness, just a comfortable rhythm. He ate 2 muffins, declaring them the best he'd had in ages, which made me ridiculously pleased. After coffee, we headed out to the garden towards the dilapidated workshop. Harold walked around it slowly, tapping the wood here and there, peering at the sagging roofline, testing the rotten doorframe with the toe of his boot. He didn't say much, just made small humming sounds, his brow furrowed in concentration. I hovered nearby, trying not to crowd him, feeling a strange mix of hope and embarrassment at the state of the structure. Finally, he turned to me. Well, he said, rubbing his chin, she's seen better days, that's for sure. The main frame seems surprisingly solid in places though. Good bones underneath the rot. He pointed out warped planks, areas where water had clearly seeped in, the precarious lean of the whole structure. It's a bigger job than just patching up, Emma. To do it right, you'd need to replace this whole front section, reinforce some of these supports, probably redo the roof. He looked at me, his gaze direct but kind. It's doable, but it'll take time and effort. My heart sank slightly. It sounded like more than I could handle alone, and certainly more than I could ask of him. Oh, I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. I see. Maybe it's best to just tear it down after all. Harold shook his head gently. No, didn't say that. Just needs a proper approach. Tell you what, he said, leaning against a relatively stable section of the wall. I've got time on my hands. And frankly, he smiled, my own garden is getting tired of me fussing over it. How about this, we tackle it together? I can show you what needs doing, guide you. We can take it slow, a few mornings a week. It'll give me something useful to do, and you'll get your greenhouse. I stared at him, surprised by the generosity of the offer. Harold, are you absolutely sure? That's incredibly kind, but it's a huge commitment. I don't want to take advantage. He waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense. It'll be good for me, good for us both. Maybe learn some new skills. He grinned, and the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. Besides, he added quietly, looking back at the workshop, I think Eleanor would have liked the idea building something useful, something beautiful, instead of letting things fall apart. That sealed it for me. The shared purpose, the connection to his late wife, the unexpected camaraderie. It felt right. Okay, Harold, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Okay, let's do it. Thank you. He simply nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling on his face. Right then, let's make a list of materials we'll need to start. And just like that, standing beside the crumbling workshop under the bright spring sky, an unexpected partnership began. The next few weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Harold would arrive around mid-morning, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'd start with coffee in the kitchen, chatting about everything and nothing, the weather, his prize-winning dahlias, a book I was reading, snippets of news. Sometimes David would be there, heading off to work, and he'd exchange pleasantries. with Harold. A quick morning, Uncle Harold. Don't work too hard, before disappearing. David seemed content with the arrangement, perhaps even slightly relieved the workshop was finally being addressed without demanding his own time. After coffee, we'd head out to the workshop. The first step was demolition, carefully removing the rotten wood, clearing away the years of accumulated debris, old broken containers, rusted tools, things I hadn't even known were in there. Harold was methodical, patient, explaining every step. He showed me how to use a pry bar effectively, how to identify salvageable timber, how to stack the waste wood neatly for disposal. He never rushed, never got frustrated, even when I was clumsy or slow. There was a quiet satisfaction in the physical work, in seeing the workshop slowly stripped back to its essential structure. The air filled with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and occasionally the sharp tang of sawdust as Harold made precise cuts with his handsaw. He brought his own tools, treasures worn smooth with years of use, and he showed me how to care for them, handing me a beautifully balanced old hammer. Feel that, he said. Good tools make the work easier. Respect them, and they'll serve you well. I learned to swing the hammer properly, drive nails straight, measure accurately. My hands, usually busy with keyboards or cooking, grew tougher, acquiring small scratches and the occasional blister, which I wore with a strange sense of pride. We worked side by side, often in comfortable silence. The only sounds the scrape of tools, the chirping of birds, the occasional instruction from Harold. But the silences weren't empty. They were filled with a growing sense of companionship, a shared understanding built through common effort. Sometimes, as we worked, we talked more deeply. He told me stories about his apprenticeship as a young man, the intricate pieces he used to build, the satisfaction of creating something lasting. He spoke about Eleanor, not with overwhelming sadness, but with a gentle fondness, sharing anecdotes about her laugh, her love for gardening, their quiet life together. Hearing him speak about her, I felt I got to know her a little, and I saw the shape of her absence in his life, a space filled now with routine and memory. In turn, I found myself opening up to him in ways I rarely did with others, not even David. Sometimes I talked about my frustrations, the kids occasionally taking me for granted, my feeling of restlessness now they were grown, my quiet yearning for something more. Though I wasn't sure what that more was, Harold was an exceptional listener. He didn't offer easy platitudes or unwanted advice. He just listened, really listened, his gaze thoughtful, occasionally nodding or asking a gentle question that showed he understood. It happens, he said one afternoon, after I'd confessed to feeling a bit invisible lately. Life changes shape around you. The trick is to find your own shape within it again. One particularly warm Thursday, we were replacing the main support beams for the front wall. It was heavy work, requiring careful measurement and maneuvering. Harold directed me, his voice calm and steady, as we positioned a new, solid piece of timber. All right, Emma, ease it down slowly. That's it. Hold it. Steady now. We worked together, breathing a little harder, focused entirely on the task. When the beam slid perfectly into place, a sense of shared accomplishment pulsed between us. Perfect. Harold breathed out, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple with the back of his hand. He looked at me and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. You're getting good at this, you know. I felt a flush of pleasure, disproportionate perhaps to the compliment, but it felt earned. Only because I have a good teacher, I replied, smiling back. In that moment, leaning against the sturdy new frame, surrounded by the tools and the scent of fresh-cut wood, I felt a connection to Harold that was surprisingly deep. It wasn't romantic, not in the slightest, but it was intimate in its own way. A closeness forged in shared work, mutual respect, and unexpected vulnerability. He saw me not just as David's wife, but as Emma, a person capable of learning, contributing, someone worth teaching and talking to. And I saw him not just as an elderly uncle, but as Harold, a man of quiet strength, wisdom, and a gentle heart still capable of connection. The workshop was slowly transforming. But so, I realized, was I. As spring deepened into early summer, the workshop project took on a life of its own. The rotten front wall was gone, replaced by sturdy new framing. Harold had shown me how to install window frames, salvaged ones he'd found at a reclamation yard, full of character, and we were starting to put up the siding. We'd settled into a rhythm, not just of work, but of companionship. Our coffee chats stretched longer some mornings. Harold would bring vegetables from his garden, plump tomatoes, crisp lettuce, and I'd send him home with portions of whatever I'd been baking or cooking. David seemed pleased with the progress, commenting on how solid the workshop looked now, but he remained largely peripheral to the actual process. It was mine and Harold's project. One Tuesday, David had a rare day off. He wandered out to the garden while Harold and I were measuring planks for the siding. "Looking good," David said, surveying our handiwork. "You two make quite the team." He clapped Harold on the shoulder. "Thanks for helping Emma out, Uncle Harold." "I owe you one." Harold just smiled modestly. "Emma's doing most of the work. She's a natural." David lingered for a few minutes watching us, but he seemed slightly out of place, an observer rather than a participant in the quiet energy we had created. He soon retreated back inside, leaving Harold and me to our measurements and saws.it. Was during these weeks that the emotional depth of our connection truly began to reveal itself, catching me slightly off guard. It wasn't anything overt, just small moments, like the time I struggled to lift a particularly heavy piece of plywood, and Harold came up beside me, not taking over but positioning himself so we could lift it together, his quiet ready lift on my count making the task manageable. Or the afternoon it started to rain unexpectedly, a sudden summer shower. We quickly covered the tools and timber and dashed into the partially rebuilt workshop. The scent of rain on dry earth filled the air. We stood there, side by side, watching the downpour, the drumming on the temporary roof covering, creating a cozy, enclosed world. We didn't speak for several minutes, just listened to the rain. Then Harold said softly, "Eleanor loved the rain. Used to say it was the earth sighing." He turned to me, a wistful look in his eyes. "It's good. Sharing this, Emma. Building something again." There was an unspoken layer to his words, a sense of purpose rediscovered, perhaps, that resonated deeply within me. I felt a profound sense of empathy for him, for his loss, but also a shared sense of discovery in the present moment. The subtle tension wasn't between Harold and me, but within myself. I found myself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays with an eagerness that surprised me. It wasn't just the workshop. It was the conversation, the shared purpose, the feeling of being seen and valued in a way that felt new. I felt guilty sometimes, wondering if my enjoyment of Harold's company was somehow disloyal to David. But David seemed genuinely untroubled, happy even that the workshop was handled and that his uncle had something to occupy his time. My connection with Harold felt pure, rooted in respect and the simple joy of creation. There was no flirtation, no inappropriate undertones, just a deep, burgeoning friendship that defied easy categorization. It was the kind of connection I hadn't realized I was missing. He saw strengths in me I hadn't recognized myself, my patience, my willingness to learn, my steady hand with a saw eventually. And I saw the resilience, kindness, and quiet dignity in him. The workshop became a symbol of this unexpected bond, a structure built not just of wood and nails, but of shared stories, quiet understanding, and mutual respect. As we worked, the boundary between teacher and student blurred, evolving into a partnership where we both learned, both contributed, both found something we needed in the scent of sawdust and the rhythm of shared work. The most unexpected part wasn't the workshop getting built, but the relationship blossoming beside it, quiet and profound under the summer sun. The climax of the project, and in many ways our shared journey, arrived on a hot afternoon in late July. We were installing the door, a beautiful old thing Harold had salvaged and painstakingly restored. It was the final major piece of the structure. Fitting it required precision, patience, and teamwork. The air was thick and still, the sun beating down relentlessly. We worked steadily, sweat dripping, communicating with economical words and gestures, honed over weeks of collaboration. Harold held the door steady while I carefully aligned the hinges, drilling the pilot holes exactly where he indicated. My hands were surprisingly steady now, confident. As I secured the last screw, Harold stepped back. "All right," he said, his voice slightly hoarse from the heat and dust. "Let's see if she swings true." I pulled the handle. The door opened smoothly, silently, perfectly balanced on its new hinges. It felt momentous. We both stood there for a moment, looking at the open doorway, the cool shadow inside beckoning. Harold turned to me, a broad smile lighting up his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "We did it, Emma. We actually did it." A wave of emotion washed over me, pride and The work, gratitude for his guidance, and a poignant sense of accomplishment that felt deeply personal. We did, I echoed, my voice catching slightly. Thank you, Harold, for everything. For teaching me, for your patience, for just being here. He looked at me, his expression softening. The pleasure was all mine, Emma. Truly, you brought this old workshop back to life. And maybe, he added, his gaze meeting mine with unexpected intensity, maybe you helped bring this old carpenter back to life a little bit too. There it was, the unspoken truth of our shared experience, laid bare in the heat of the afternoon. It wasn't just about wood and nails. It was about connection, purpose, about finding value in unexpected places. My eyes welled up a mixture of joy and a strange, sweet melancholy. Perhaps for the project ending, perhaps for the sheer unexpectedness of the bond we'd formed. He saw my tears, and naturally, respectfully, he simply placed a calloused hand gently on my shoulder for a brief moment, a gesture of solidarity, of shared understanding. It wasn't romantic or possessive. It was profoundly human, acknowledging the depth of the moment, the work done, the connection made. Eleanor would have loved this, he said quietly, looking around the transformed space. She'd have loved what you've done here. In the weeks that followed, I painted the workshop a soft lavender, planted climbing jasmine nearby, and furnished the inside with a small table, a comfortable chair, and my gardening tools neatly hung on hooks Harold had helped me install. It was exactly as I had envisioned my little haven. Harold came by occasionally, ostensibly to check on the jasmine or drop off more vegetables, but really, I think, just to see the finished product being used, to share a cup of tea in the space we built together. Our conversations continued, easy and familiar, but the dynamic had subtly shifted. We were no longer just teacher and student, or nephew's wife and uncle. We were friends, true friends. David loved the workshop, genuinely impressed by the transformation. And I think quietly proud of me. He even spent a few evenings out there with me, just talking. Perhaps seeing the tangible result of my efforts, seeing the collaboration with Harold, had shifted something in his perception too. Our communication seemed a little easier, a little more open. Looking back, asking Harold for help was one of the best decisions I ever made. It wasn't just about fixing a dilapidated structure. It was about fixing something within myself I hadn't even realized was broken. I discovered a competence I didn't know I possessed, found a voice I hadn't been using, and forged a connection that enriched my life in ways I could never have predicted. The experience didn't create conflict. It created understanding. It deepened my respect for Harold, gave me a new appreciation for the quiet strength of intergenerational bonds, and subtly reshaped my relationship with David, reminding us both perhaps of the importance of shared effort and mutual appreciation. The workshop stands sturdy and beautiful at the bottom of the garden, a testament to hard work and unexpected friendship. And sometimes, sitting inside, listening to the birds, smelling the earth, I reflect on how asking for help, stepping slightly outside my comfort zone, led not to awkwardness or complication, but to growth, connection, and a quiet, profound sense of self-discovery. It just goes to show you truly never know what might happen when you reach out.